Google's Gemini is continuing to get some great traction as developers rush to use the tool with their own programs. Our Google reporter Erin Woo wrote a deep dive on that trend. Her story had a ton of exclusive reporting and inside anecdotes, and I want to bring her on to talk all about it. Erin, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, what did you find in your reporting about Google's Gemini traction with developers?
Essentially, over the past year, as the quality of Google's models has improved, the number of people using it has gone way up. And so, looking at like the growth curve for the number of people using the Gemini API, it's really just exponential growth, increasing growth. Like you can see that in the curve. And so, the numbers we quoted in the story, it went from 35 billion API calls. That's essentially when someone makes a request to do something with the Gemini API to 35 billion in March to 85 billion in August. And so almost a 3x increase in just a few months after they released Gemini 2.5. And that was the first model where people were like, oh, like Google released a good model, like Google's catching up.
Okay. And tell me, in terms of the business model here, not having worked with APIs myself, which I know is actually probably the most basic thing that everyone should do in their life, from what I understand. I haven't done it.
Yeah.
I'll get there, okay, to our listeners. But the business model here, in terms of what it means, they make money every time a developer
Yeah.
accesses the API. How does that translate into revenue?
Yeah, so Google charges for API calls, so there's like a small cost associated with that. But what I learned from talking with sources is that it actually goes beyond just the money that's going for API sales. And so they've calculated internally that for when someone spends money on an API call, that leads to a lot more dollars being spent elsewhere on Google Cloud because now they have to pay for storage, they have to pay for databases. There's all of these other products that now it just like becomes easy to buy because they're already doing this AI stuff via Google. And so there's actually an outsized impact from these API calls, even though like the API calls themselves like aren't necessarily making as much money.
So this is the whole get them in the door so that they spend more money elsewhere type of
Basket of hot
strategy.
dog with Google.
And so what does your reporting show the net impact this could have on Google's cloud revenue overall?
Right. So this could be good for Google's cloud revenue overall again, because when people are coming in to spend on Gemini, the Gemini API, they're spending more on other things. And this is even though it's been only recently that the Gemini API has started to have even like positive profit margins. Like the first couple models, Gemini 1.0 and 1.5, had largely negative profit margins because Google was discounting so much to get people in the door. And even Gemini 2.0 only sometimes had positive profit margins, but they've started to turn that around and charge more with 2.5 and later models just because like the models are better and so now they can compete on quality instead of just on price.
Okay, so more API calls, more revenue, more profit from what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Sounds like all great news.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
next question I have is, are developers liking what they're getting in terms of
Yeah.
the tool that they're purchasing?
Yeah, and so like I read about two things in the story. Essentially, Google's trying to sell the Gemini API, but they're also trying to make a business selling software on top of that. Because like as we're talking about margins, like that's also where you can really start juicing the margins, right? If you're selling more complicated software, you can basically just charge more for that. And so the flagship enterprise product that they're selling now is called Gemini Enterprise, as you would expect it to be. And it's essentially like a mixture of like the chatbot, and you can like search across your company's information and you can also like build agents using this. And so this is something that Google is expected to highlight during earnings. Like the product in some metrics is doing like really well. Like it's already at 8 million paid enterprise subscribers and then like another like more than 100 million people have signed up online. At the same time, like I talked to a lot of people using this, there have been some like mixed reviews. Like there's some people who are really happy about this, like they're using it for a lot of things, and then there are some people who are like, it's kind of like this low key like does not work. Like there's
Why
one
why doesn't it? What are the issues?
I mean, sometimes the agent builder doesn't work, like sometimes things doesn't connect. Sometimes things don't connect. Like I talked to one consultant who was showing me like, look, like here's a screenshot of like trying to make like the most basic like summarize my emails one and it like was not working. And I talked to another person whose like job is like working with companies to install Google Cloud and he was saying like, yeah, like I think it's a good product. Like the slim majority of my customers are in favor of it, but it's close to like 50-50 of people who like it and don't. Like that said, like people are signing up for this right now. Another analyst I was talking to was like, well, like, like people are still like, I'll give this a shot. Like they're not disappointed enough to like completely stop using it. But it's a nascent product. Like there are kinks to be worked out. Like the thing doesn't totally work, but like people are excited.
Are those kinks that you talk about, are
Yeah.
those unique to Google's Gemini? I mean, the issues, are they unique to Gemini or, I mean, do they have the same complaints about OpenAI's products?
Yeah, so I mean, I think like the better comp here is like looking at something like Microsoft, looking at something like Salesforce. And we've written a lot about how both Microsoft and Salesforce are really struggling to try to sell these products to enterprise customers. And so, like, definitely Google is not alone in this. I mean, like, Google, if anything, would argue, like, look, we're doing so much better than Copilot. Like, we want to see this as like the Copilot killer. This is like what can like give us a foothold against Microsoft. But everyone's kind of struggling with this. Like, it's very early days still for enterprise adoption of this technology.
Great. And last question for you, Aaron. In terms of questions that you have to continuing your reporting on this topic,
Yeah.
what are you wondering?
I mean, I really want to know like when this stuff is going to start working, right? Like, I want to know like when we're going to start seeing broad scale enterprise adoption of these AI tools and like the impact that that's going to have. Like, there's obviously a lot of questions coming up, especially around earnings, how this is going to boost Google's cloud revenue, Google's overall cloud revenue, like what that means for Alphabet's growth. Like investors will obviously want to know like what's the return on investment that Google's getting from like the $90 billion in capex it spent next year. So this is a story that like in some levels like seems kind of small, but also like ties into a lot of questions about like Google's performance and like what's happening in the enterprise. So it's definitely something I'm going to keep watching.
Well, and I think the most revealing part of your reporting, I think for me, is this idea that if the purpose from a strategic perspective right now with these APIs and with Gemini is to get people in the door so that they spend more on the traditional cloud business that has
Yeah,
obviously carried the Google Cloud sector segment
yeah.
overall. I mean, that certainly tells you something about the relative sizes of these operations right now, and just what the overall strategy is. So, Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on. We, of course, have Google earnings coming up in a couple weeks, and so I am excited to speak with you then, if not before, about what we learn. That is Erin Woo, our Google reporter here at The Information.